Here today, and it's great to be here. And I've now been at EPA Region 10 for about 20 months, and it's been a very interesting ride for me. So I'm going to share some of the things that have made the first 20 months of my job so interesting for me. And I think some of you might have noticed that EPA has been at the center of some pretty intense controversy lately, with some even calling for abolishment of EPA. And today, I'd like to take on some of that criticism directly. I believe strongly, personally, in the value of environmental regulation, particularly the environmental regulation that EPA has led on over the last 40 years. And I believe it's important not only because of the environmental and public health benefits, but as a driver of jobs and economic benefits as well. And we've had a 40-year record of successfully balancing environmental and economic interests at EPA, and we're not about to change that. And so today, my remarks are going to be in defense of EPA and in defense of regulation by us and by our partners. And but before I get started with that, I do want to mention how much I appreciate the work of NEBC and those of you in this room. You guys are the early adopters. You're the people who continue to drive innovation in environmental cleanups and in environmental field in general, both in private sector achievements and in public policy. And you're the folks who make our communities cleaner, make our communities better. So I salute you guys. You folks are the definition of green jobs in my mind. You're developing the on-the-ground solutions to environmental problems, and we at EPA need you, and your communities need you for the work that you do. So thank you again for having me here today, and thanks for what you're doing in our communities to make a difference, to improve the environment and to improve public health. And with that, I want to start talking a bit about what I believe are some of the truly remarkable successes of the environmental movement and of EPA and its partners in its 40 years of protecting human health and the environment. And many of the things that we've done at EPA are in partnership with state and local environmental and public health agencies. And I believe many of those things are now taken for granted. And for instance, one of those is ensuring clean and safe drinking water. And just as an up-and-close personal example for those in this room, we're going to do a little audience participation today as part of this. Who here in the audience today would like a little extra dose of arsenic or E. coli in their glass of water that they've got at their table? Raise your hand if you'd like some more arsenic or E. coli in your water. I saw one hand go up back there. So I use that example because we do tend to take for granted now many of the extremely important advances we've made collectively in environmental protection. And another example that I would put out there, and I'm going to throw a few examples out today, we can pretty safely assume that our kids aren't unduly exposed to pesticides or unsafe chemicals. And I can say, I think safely, that that wouldn't be the case without environmental regulations in that arena. And we take for granted that our smokestacks no longer pour out black smoke, plumes of soot, and uncontrolled toxics. But again, without regulation, the private marketplace wouldn't be solving that problem. It just wouldn't be the case without regulation in that arena. And by the way, we still have work to do in that arena, especially in some of our environmental justice communities, our underrepresented communities, and that's one of our current priorities at the agency. But another example, we all expect our cars to be really clean today and to have good fuel economy and low emissions. But in fact, the requirements for lower tailpipe emissions from EPA were very positive technology forcing requirements that led the drive to develop new technologies. Those clean technology products have come from a wide variety of suppliers that created thousands of jobs to develop and manufacture the advanced equipment needed to meet the regulations. And without the regulatory push, we'd be a lot farther behind on that technology curve, I'd say as a fact. And the advances in technology to meet the emissions requirements led to much more precise combustion controls that have enabled a lot greater fuel economy. And for the gearheads that are out there in the audience, they've enabled much greater power from our cars, from smaller displacement engines as well. So you know, another audience participation question here. How many of you in the audience think that we would have hybrid cars on the road today without the push from California or without the push from EPA to reduce our emissions and drive us in that direction? Any hands in the air on that one? Well, I do see a hand over there. I'm surprised. You know, the list of examples could go on, I think. And the point that I'm trying to make is that regulations to improve public health and the environment have led to huge societal and economic benefits, from reduced healthcare costs and healthier lives, and yes, reduction in real lives lost to exposure to pollution. And they've led to phenomenal technological developments as well, and job creation to create the products and the services to bring that into play. And to bring that home, the people in this room are largely employed in the application and response to environmental regulations. Whether it's Superfund cleanups or response to air quality requirements or the design and installation of clean water systems, you, the people in this room, make up the industry that has developed to make these things happen. And there would be a lot fewer of you if we didn't have the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, Superfund, and a number of other key environmental protection laws. So the push against environmental regulations that we're seeing as job killers just doesn't ring true to me. Some of this, of course, is a repeating pattern. I'm now 60 years old, and I've seen this, you know, in every drop in the economy. Every time there's a recession, there's some call for a rollback of environmental protections. And right now, those calls are at a pretty fevered pitch, and some of those folks, you know, even include members of Congress. A couple of weeks ago, in an op-ed in the LA Times, EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson wrote, "How we respond to this assault on our environmental and public health protections will mean the difference between sickness and health, in some cases life and death, for hundreds of thousands of citizens." And she noted in her editorial that of the 1,100 coal-fired units at energy facilities around the country, about 3/4 of them are over 30 years old. And 480 of them, almost half, have no pollution controls at all. And some, including some powerful members of Congress, would like to keep it that way. And right now at EPA, we're pushing back against those that want to block long-anticipated rules on coal-fired power plants that would set emission limits on mercury, acid gases, and heavy metals emitted by those power plants. And some would ask, why put these rules in place right now when the economy is slow? Well, you know, the answer to that is pretty multifaceted, but one of the key reasons for me is that those rules that require those improvements were put in place in the 1990 Clean Air Act, adopted by Congress. And the utility industry has been expecting those rules for over 21 years now, and the public has been waiting for the health benefits from those requirements that long as well. And while some say that these rules kill jobs, our analysis shows that the new requirements would actually create thousands of jobs to manufacture the control equipment and install it at the power plant sites. And we also see incredible public benefit from reduced healthcare costs in implementing the rules. Our analysis, in fact, shows that we would be saving an estimated 1,400 lives per month across the country from the new requirements. Let me repeat that, 1,400 lives per month saved from rules that have been anticipated for 21 years and delayed numerous times. And the requirements of these rules would play out over a number of years. They wouldn't, you know, instantly be turned on and you know, come in place in this economy right now. They're going to be phased in over time and done in a reasonable, responsible manner. But you know, one big frustration for me in all of this is the time that we waste on political theater. We're seeing an unprecedented effort to block regulations that are not even being proposed by EPA, both through budget riders and through proposed legislation aimed at what can only be described as phantom regulations. It really is political theater, and I'll give you two examples of that highlight this. One is spilled milk, and the other is agricultural dust. Several members of Congress have repeatedly insisted that legislation is needed to block EPA from regulating milk spills, and dust from farm operations. And EPA Administrator Jackson has repeatedly said that we have no intention and no plans to regulate agriculture in either area, but lobbyists and some members of Congress want to keep the myth alive that EPA somehow has an anti-agriculture agenda reflected in wanting to regulate spilled milk or wanting to regulate farm dust. So it is frustrating at times to be spending our valuable time and resources fighting about things that are illusions when we should be spending our time on real issues. I think the long view is that Americans want both a healthy environment and a healthy economy. And there's no reason to expect that we can't have both. We have 40 years of history showing that we can do that. And we at EPA are very conscious of both the need for environmental protection and the need for a healthy economy in the country. And the reality is that we spend a very large amount of our time listening to input about how to make sure that we're addressing both a healthy environment and a healthy economy in the way we craft and implement our rules. And of course, we're not perfect, and we don't always get it right, but I can tell you we do listen to stakeholder input. We go through extensive processes with industry and with other stakeholders to make sure that we're hearing what will work and how it will work, and when we don't get it right, we do change course in order to achieve the appropriate balance on this. But I can tell you we're not losing sight of our mission and what's at stake, so you will continue to see us moving forward on some very important issues at EPA. But we also, however, are committed to reviewing and repealing rules that have outlived their usefulness. The President has asked us to hold listening sessions about that, and we've taken action to review and revise rules that need recrafting. In fact, just before this speech, we held an hour roundtable with folks from your board of directors to talk about those things. We've also listened to local governments about the need for flexibility and additional time to meet requirements where there are financial hardships associated with expensive infrastructure requirements. But we're not changing the underlying environmental requirements, but we are working to schedule the requirements in a way that won't break the municipal bank or be unduly impacting on local ratepayers. And we've got some new guidance on that where we've got some real opportunities to make that a reality in some of our communities here in the Northwest. And again, for more than 40 years, the American economy has prospered while our national environmental protections expanded. And our regulatory authorities, in my mind, have spawned remarkable innovations over the years and have been a boon. I really believe that, a boon to the economy. And I think, if you look at our history, you won't see a landscape that's littered with economic chaos. We have worked together on this, and we've created economic opportunity with what we've done. And I think that if people looked at this more closely, they'd see what I think you and I see, real economic growth that clean water and clean land contributed to, not detracted from. Put another way, innovation and investment spawned by reasonable regulation led to economic activity, not stifled economic activity. So if necessity is the mother of invention, isn't increased investment in our public health necessary for continued economic health? I believe so. And with that, we end up investing in our future health and at the same time driving innovation and creating economic activity. That's what you people in this room do. In fact, the Clean Air Act over its history has resulted in a 30-to-1 benefit to cost ratio. Between 2000 and 2008, the environmental protection business in the US, your business, has grown steadily, and it now stands at over a $300 billion a year industry nationwide. So when we implement pollution control programs, the impact on the economy, in my view, isn't negative. It really is a shifting of where we spend, and I believe it's appropriate to incorporate the environmental costs into our business costs, if we're reasonable about how we do that. Think about this. Since 1950, the population of the US has more than doubled, and the number of cars on our roads has tripled. Yet air pollution is half of what it was in 1950. Cars are 10 times cleaner than they used to be, even more than that. In 2010 alone, the Clean Air Act prevented 160,000 premature deaths and 100,000 hospital visits. Lead's no longer in gasoline, and it's no longer sprayed on orchards like it was when I was a kid growing up in orchard country in eastern Washington. And today, the amount of lead in our kids' blood is just a small fraction of what it was 40 years ago. So we've made real environmental progress. And thanks to things like the Clean Water Act, every sewage treatment plant in the continental U.S. has at least secondary treatment, and many are now even going beyond that. And finally, thanks to the Safe Drinking Water Act, no matter where you go in the continental U.S., you can give your kids tap water with confidence that it won't make them sick. And that didn't used to be the case, and it isn't the case when you go to some foreign nations as well. So all of this has happened through the ingenuity of American business, state and local regulators, and critically federal standard setting by EPA under laws enacted by Congress. And I want to emphasize that last part, under laws enacted by Congress. People like you in this room have all been a part of this remarkable success story. So given these remarkable public health achievements, it's frustrating to hear the intense EPA bashing by some of the ideologues out there with little appreciation for EPA's mission and little appreciation for the accomplishments that people have made in the environmental front. And as Administrator Jackson says, people should watch what we do at EPA, not listen to what people say we do. What we are doing is the hard work the staff at EPA and the states have been consistently doing to benefit Americans for the last 40 years, protecting public health and protecting the environment. And I wanted to cite a couple of pretty high-profile issues that I've been working on lately that sort of exemplify how thoughtfully and methodically EPA does go about its work and does its business. One of those is a big issue up in Bristol Bay in Alaska. Some of you may have heard about the controversy over a proposed gold and copper mine up in Alaska in the Bristol Bay watershed. The Bristol Bay fishery in that watershed is the largest remaining undisturbed salmon fishery in the world. In some years, that salmon fishery is worth about $500 million in annual revenue. It employs thousands of people. It feeds millions of people across the country and around the world. But the mining proposed in the headwaters would likely be the biggest open pit copper and gold mine in North America. 2 or 3 years ago, when metals prices were lower than they are today, the Pebble site was judged to be worth about $300 billion. That's billion, not million. $300 billion. And you do the math, now with gold at about $1,500 an ounce, it's worth probably even more. And last year, several tribes, I think about a dozen tribes, came to us, Alaska Native villages and commercial fishing organizations, and they asked the EPA to use our Clean Water Act Section 404C authority to prevent mine development in the headwaters of the Bristol Bay watershed. And as you might imagine, there are several other tribes and a number of other interests that are up there, other native villages, mining advocates, and high-ranking elected officials in Alaska that have asked us not to use our authority preemptively and allow the permitting process to go forward. So again, EPA in this instance, high-stakes, high-dollar mining and big, high-dollar, high-stakes fishing. And as typical for the agency, and most appropriate, I think, and reasonable, we've decided that we need to know much more about the Bristol Bay watershed before we can determine how we respond to those requests for action. So we're now in the middle of a year-long watershed assessment to do the science on what makes the watershed tick and whether there are technologies available that could make the mining compatible with preserving the salmon fishery or not. And we've also in that process learned that there's not just one large mine under active exploration in the headwaters of Bristol Bay. There are 7 very active mining claims under exploration and development up there. So now we need to consider what the cumulative effects of multiple large-scale mines would be on the fishery. So we're doing what EPA does best. We're carefully considering the science, and we're going to make decisions that are based on carefully done assessments. We're not lurching into actions uninformed, knee-jerk, deciding one way or the other. We're consulting with a variety of agencies and experts to help us understand what the consequences of large-scale development in the watershed could be, and we'll make our decisions about whether and when to use our authorities based on a carefully prepared, peer-reviewed scientific assessment. And this one's going to be followed closely by a lot of people. The Anti-Pebble Mine campaign is probably running the biggest national campaign I've ever seen. We've already gotten over 30,000 letters and emails urging us to use our Clean Water Act authority preemptively and prevent the mine from interfering with the salmon fishery. I've gotten letters from senators from multiple states. It's a pressure-packed situation, but as an attorney and a Northwesterner, I'm fascinated by the issues at play there. And in the end, the agency will make its decision next year based on the law and on sound science, and we're developing all of that in a carefully crafted watershed assessment. And we're hiring a bunch of contractors to work on that, people like you in this room, to help us with that information development. So look for more on that over the next few months. That one's a big one on my plate and a fascinating one. I wanted to talk a little bit about Portland Harbor on the more local front. Here EPA is confronted with a pretty complex cleanup of Portland Harbor, and that cleanup is part of a much larger effort to reduce toxic loading in the rivers and streams feeding the Columbia and in the Columbia itself. The EPA's job seems straightforward enough: develop an implementable and fundable plan to clean up toxics in the lower Willamette that are the legacy of more than a century of assorted industrial activities. But that plan needs to account for human health risk, ecological risk, recontamination, capping of sediments, removal of sediments, disposal of sediments, assignment of liability, funding, and engaging the communities, the various communities, in the decision making before we make final decisions on that. And as it turns out, with a long and varied list of current private and responsible public parties, publicly responsible parties, PRPs, the development of the plan, or even the development of a plan to develop the plan, is a painstaking task. It's particularly tough when merely the anxiety over the outcome of required analyses gets in the way of building the scientific foundation that we need for sound decision making. And it's been more than a decade so far that we've been working on that. It's clearly an unacceptably long time to get that done, but we're eager to complete the studies and get moving on that. And I mean, we're trying to channel everyone's energy in the direction of getting it done. But decisions in a democratic participatory society can be messy. And so while I'm pushing hard to get the cleanup done in Portland Harbor, we're also working with all of the community to make sure we get it right. And that's just as important as pushing it out the door as fast as we can. So I want to talk a little bit about some voluntary efforts that are going on too. I'll move through this pretty quickly, but I've spent some time today defending our regulatory programs and our authorities and talking about a couple of interesting cases that fall under our regulatory purview. But as you can all attest, I think so much of the progress that we'll make over the next 40 years will be through voluntary efforts that go beyond what local, state, or federal regulations require. And during my 15 years when I was at the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, the most rewarding programs I worked on and the ones that I found created the greatest environmental progress were made when we worked with people to go beyond regulatory requirements on a voluntary basis. For instance, the Port of Portland was and remains a key partner in the West Coast Collaborative, a completely voluntary effort of agencies and industries up and down the West Coast to reduce diesel emissions far ahead of new regulatory requirements. And the achievements in that collaborative have been remarkable, and for major ports like the Port of Portland and the Port of Seattle, emission reduction has become part of the brand that attracts tenants and shippers seeking to be part of a green supply chain. In fact, the Port of Seattle has developed a tagline that it wants to be the cleanest, greenest port in North America, and I feel great that we were a part of helping them put that initiative forward. So you could say that when it comes to goods movement, going green is really big business, and we're seeing that supply chain driver become part of the thinking that goes beyond what regulatory requirements might be. And I want to mention the Port of Vancouver here as well. The Port of Vancouver is also part of the collaborative, and its leadership on emission reductions is matched by really its eye-popping work on cleaning up its stormwater. And as part of the ongoing efforts to help keep the Columbia River clean and preserve it as a vital resource, the Port has created the Clean Water Challenge, which incorporates pollution reduction activities into a reward-based acknowledgement system. And there's 3 employees from the Port of Vancouver. If you raise your hands, you guys. They're doing some great work. The Port asks tenants to look at their operations and take measurable steps to reduce pollution to the water around them. And there aren't any trade secrets or confidential business information in the challenge, so the port shares these best practices with other tenants, and the tenant who takes the steps with the biggest benefit to water quality is given the Environmental Tenant of the Year award, and ultimately the port is able to treat 99% of stormwater before it reaches the Columbia River, and that's really nearly unheard of success. So congratulations, guys, on that innovative program. I want to also mention Blunt Industries, and it's pretty hard to know when to stop going down the list of success stories, so I'll just mention one more. A lot of you know Blunt Industries, which makes heavy-duty forestry and construction machines. Not long ago, the leaders at Blunt partnered with EPA to use green chemistry to reduce the use of lead in its manufacturing process. And Blunt invested in new equipment, and as a result, the company has eliminated 14,000 pounds of lead, 63,000 pounds per year of related waste, and 800,000 gallons per year of related wastewaters. And this has saved hundreds of thousands of dollars in labor and raw material costs, and it's provided a cleaner and much healthier work environment for employees there. So in conclusion, you know, I love seeing examples like those I've mentioned today, and I'm sure there are hundreds more here around the Portland, Vancouver area, and including ones that are involving you folks that are sitting in this room, creating the innovation. And I believe, you know, that collectively all of these examples prove that, you know, not only are regulations not job killers, the regulatory environment has created the opportunity to be an incubator of innovation, an incubator for green jobs, and for people to go beyond regulation in the work that they do. And with a tagline of "the environment is our business," the NEBC and its members get it. You understand that we're an opportunity-rich environment. Progress on the environmental front is clearly an investment in us and an investment in our kids, and I believe it drives innovation and economic growth. Industries looking to the future want to go beyond compliance, but they need a level playing field so they're not putting themselves at a competitive disadvantage. So we need the regulatory underpinnings to create the opportunities for more innovation as well. And it's our job at EPA, and it's the job of the Department of Ecology and Oregon DEQ and Oregon Health to make sure that everyone is at least obeying the law and helping people to come up with creative solutions that go way beyond the law to enhance their successes. And as we look at the next 40 years, the challenges are even greater than they were since 1970, when EPA was created by then President Nixon. Things like climate change and new challenges in clean water and population growth are putting in front of us some of the most vexing problems we've ever had to face in our history. And we need all the dedicated hands we can get to solve those problems. And I want to thank you all today for being part of that effort, and thanks for inviting me here today to be part of this event.